Welcome, everyone. It looks like that there are two ways that one can estimate rooftop PV in South Africa. The one method is based on a load analysis in conjunction with local weather, and Hendri Bower, our speaker today, will be talking about that. Another method is based on aerial photographic interpretation and digitization then of the panels themselves as visible from the sky, and turning that into numbers which are then aggregated by area. So I asked Hendri to see if he could come and present for us today, because as you know, the estimation of the level of solar PV installation in South Africa is somewhat critical for a number of reasons. The first reason is that it obviously offsets the network demand, and having an idea of what the installed capacity is and where it might be going is a very useful tool for planning. The other reason for understanding the installed PV capacity is obviously a commercial reason. It gives you an idea of where all of the ancillary devices associated with PV systems are possibly going. That includes batteries and hot water, heating alternatives, and so on. So very useful to know that if you're going to manage the system into the future and estimate revenue, etc., etc. So I made contact with Hendri a couple of days ago, and he is a senior consultant at National Transmission Company of South Africa, and he has over 15 years experience at National Control. And he specializes in power system studies, analysis, development, and implementation of related models and techniques, with special focus on electricity demand forecasting. So if you want to know how demand forecasting is done at a national level in transmission, Hendri is your guy. He has also been involved in renewable energy sector since inception of the first projects, with a focus on the impact that these have on generation supply requirements, including the recent increase in installed rooftop PVs. So Hendri, thank you so much for agreeing to present to us today, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say. I hand over to you for the next 40 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Marcus. Thank you for that introduction. Like you mentioned, this is quite a specific topic that's of great interest to us, especially here at National Control. We're very involved with running the system and operating the system, very operational based. So a lot of focus of the work that I'm doing is basically in my field, but I do believe that there's a great spillover into other sectors as well.
Fully agree.
So I'll be talking about like you mentioned, the analytical approach to estimating the installed rooftop PV for South Africa. A lot of what's in my first slide has already been shared with your introduction, so thank you very much for doing part of my work. It helps a lot. But yeah, there's been quite a massive uptake in the rooftop PV sector, actually across the world, not just in South Africa. However, we are particularly blessed with the amount of solar energy that we have in our country. Lots of area more so than others, but still we do have a lot of solar energy in our country, and it's being used for sure. So initially, and I'm talking about many years ago now, the installations were mainly focused on large scale. So talking about your independent power producers. However, as the years progressed, the cost of the panels decreased, and also there were many more suppliers and a lot of smaller scale panels that became available. And this really resulted in an increased level of installation of the rooftop PVs. Now, during recent years, specifically, this has been really accelerated. Well, holding thumbs for this financial year, but during the past few years, we've had a lot of continuous load shedding. So that has really pushed the installation of the rooftop PV significantly. I would believe more so than anything else. But then there's other factors as well. And one of them is a continuous thing, is the increasing cost of electricity. It's something that goes on continuously, and definitely it will keep on driving the installations. And then also for the previous SARS financial year, there was also a tax incentive, which also created some of the increased installations. Now, if we look at for us specifically, but I mean, like I mentioned, across all sectors, it's crucial to gain insight into what is the magnitude of these installations. And that is really what led to me looking at the analysis of the regional demand data, as well as the weather forecast and how these relates to what's happening. So now I'm going to talk about the methodology that's used to estimating the installed rooftop PV. I'll also be sharing an example after this slide. So I know it's quite a bit of detail, but I think it's quite good to still talk through it. So the variables that I use, as I mentioned, is looking at the regional demand data. This is at a transmission substation level. I'm also looking at the cloud cover forecast and the temperature forecast. Now, I use these values at 12 o'clock every day, so at noon every day, over a rolling 3-month period. And this is really because your maximum generation from your PV is during the noon, on cloudless day. And then, like I mentioned, this is aggregated, and I use it at a provincial level. So what I do is I look at what is the comparison between similar days of the week. In other words, if I'm looking at the data of a Tuesday, the demand on a Tuesday is very unique as opposed to, for example, a Sunday. Sunday, everybody's on the weekend, everybody's at home, so your demand is significantly lower than a day in the week. So each day has got its own type of behavior. So similar days of the week are compared against similar days in order to get a more accurate comparison. And then I also look at within these similar days, in other words, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, etc. Where is there a significant change in cloud cover? So as an example, if a particular day is sunny, and then the very next week on the same weekday, it's a very cloudy day. That gives you quite a good understanding of what's happening between these 2 days with different levels of cloud covers. Now, in contrast to this, obviously, if 2 days have got the same amount of sunshine or the same amount of cloud cover, then it's excluded from my analysis, because any other demand behavior then will not be attributed at noon to what's happening with your level of cloud cover. Now, also consider temperature. This is a very important variable, and temperature is a very big driver in terms of demand. So one needs to be very careful when doing this analysis that, if 1 week is warm and the next week is quite cold, then that change in demand will be attributed to the temperatures that has changed rather than that of the cloud cover. So I'm only using similar days in terms of temperatures, in other words, similar temperature ranges, but then with a significant change in cloud cover. So I also have quite a range of additional logical checks and parameters that I use, things like school holidays, public holidays, anything that can alter the demand behavior, like strike events or things like that. So that when I compare similar days, the comparison can be a clean comparison while removing most of the other variables that has an impact on any of the demand deviations. So like I mentioned, I filter out any of the data that's not relevant, and then I use the average demand change then during those periods where there's a significant change. So this demand change at noon then is then directly attributed to the rooftop PVs. So if all other variables have been catered for and have been removed, but there's still a significant change in demand at a time of a significant change of cloud cover, this change is then seen as the impact that the rooftop PVs have, which I think is quite a marvelous way of looking at this, because it's really a clean way of looking at it. So also just to mention, I see that there in my slides, The impact of the contracted renewable independent power producers, specifically the PV, has already been catered for because we do have the metering for these IPPs. So that component has already been catered for this. So the change in demand is purely attributed to the rooftop PV component. And then just a last point there is that I do look at the ratio between what is your maximum generation versus your installed capacity. So even for your contracted PV plants, your maximum output level is never at the same height or magnitude of your installation. This is to be expected. So as an example, if a plant has got an installation of 100 megawatt, normally your maximum will sit close to about 90 megawatts, especially during certain periods of the year, and that level can be even lower during winter months. So that ratio between your maximum generation and your installed capacity I use, and I incorporate that to get the final result for the installed rooftop PV capacity. So yeah, that's quite a mouthful. That's why I thought it would be a good idea to show a particular example. Now this is for Gauteng only. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, I do it at provincial level. I'm using Gauteng as an example, but this is done across all provinces. What I did is I compared the 26th of May against the 2nd of June of this year, so 2024. Looking at what was happening with the temperatures, looking what was happening with the cloud cover, and seeing what is the impact at regional level on the demand. Now, as we can see at noon on that day, during the latter parts of the day, there was a deviation in the temperatures as more and more cloud cover came in. But at least during the noon period, week on week, the difference in temperatures between the 2 weeks, and this was for a Sunday on Sunday, the difference in temperature was only a half a degree difference, which is very, very small. In other words, at noon on Sunday, the 2nd versus noon on Sunday, the 26th, the temperature was at similar levels. In contrast, looking at the cloud cover, on Sunday the 2nd, there was 73% higher level of cloud cover as opposed to the previous week, which actually had no cloud cover during noon. So this was a perfect example of looking what's happening with the demand, because there were no other components that influenced the change in demand during that period, apart from the cloud cover. So if we look at to the right side of the slide, looking at this graph, the green line is showing what was the demand levels on Sunday, the 26th of May, and the dark gray line is showing what was it on Sunday, the 2nd of June, for Gauteng only. Now, during noon, the deviation between these two was sitting at close to 1,200 megawatts in deviation. Now, that is quite significant. And like I mentioned, because all other factors have already been catered for, it means that that change in the demand behavior is attributed to the loss of rooftop PV generation. So as you can expect, if you have high levels of cloud cover, your output from your PVs are dropping, which means that the amount of energy that we need to supply as national control, or ultimately as the larger ESCOM, that portion then needs to be supplied by us. And that difference then is what is attributed to the rooftop PV. So in other words, the amount of energy that's lost by rooftop PV that we needed to generate more, specifically in this example for Gauteng, is then to say that that was the amount of generation that we could have received from the rooftop PVs had there been no cloud cover. And that, I believe, is quite an excellent way of looking at this. So that is purely looking at Gauteng. So 1,200 megawatts difference on that particular day for that particular example. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, I do this over a rolling 3-month period, just to make sure that I don't overuse one particular event, but I actually use an average across that period, so that I get a more of a realistic view in terms of the deviation that the cloud cover creates on the demand. Yeah, so that's, I believe, is quite a nice example. So that's the premise of how this methodology is used. There are lots of small things here and there that I assume, lots of checks and balances, but I do believe that this gives a very nice high-level example of what's happening in terms of trying to determine what the impact is of the rooftop PV. Okay, so this slide is very busy, but I wanted to include all of it because I think it gives a very good overview and a very good picture. I started doing this analysis in July of 2022. So it means it's going over just over 2 years now that I've been looking at this analysis. Now, back in July 2022, right at the bottom of the table, this is looking at using that methodology. What is the estimated installed capacity for the rooftops for all the provinces? So starting at the Eastern Cape, running through to Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, up to Western Cape, and then the total of the country in the last column. So back then, we were looking at just over 2,200 megawatts of installed capacity. Like I mentioned, this is installed, not necessarily what your generation level will be at, but the installed capacity of the rooftop PVs. Now, this has now progressed over time, and you can see how we've increased, and quite a significant amount of increase occurred during last year, like I mentioned, with the load shedding, as well as the tax incentive and higher electricity rates. And our latest estimation is showing that we are just short of 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity from rooftop PV. This is more than double what we have for the contracted IPP PV plants. Now, the big difference between the two is that for the contracted IPP PV plants, we do receive forecast of what the expected output will be. We have actual metering as well as real-time signals, so we know exactly what's happening at those facilities. In contrast with the rooftop PV, we've got no visibility, no metering, no signals, and also no forecasting. So, this has become a very crucial component, and we need to keep an eye on it very, very closely. So I just want that to sink in. Close to 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity from rooftop PVs. Now, if we look at our conventional generation, a large coal or thermal power station is looking about at a six-pack around about 3,600 megawatts. So this is almost hitting double a large coal-powered station just from behind the metering generation. And I also just want to mention that, I'm just going to mention this while you have a browse at the figures, but they do include also the ground-mounted as well as all other PV installations that do not have contracts with NTCSA. In other words, it includes all the PV generators that are not contracted via the Renewable IPP program. It's just something to mention. So although I keep on using the phrase rooftop PV, I just want to highlight that I do include those installations behind the meter as well. And then also, like I mentioned, this analysis is looking at events when there's a significant change week on week between the cloud cover. If there are large periods of stable weather, then the analysis won't be able to pick up any significant change due to cloud cover. So if you look at July 2020, so the top two rows, July 2024 and August 2024, the analysis was not able to pick up any additional installed capacity between those 2 months. And it's purely because of that reason. In other words, there was not any periods of significant change in just your cloud cover, excluding any temperature changes, to highlight any significant growth in any of the provinces. I do expect in the next analysis that we are going to see some exciting stuff. I mean, you can already see the weather that we're having at the moment. I mean, actually across the entire country, it's few sunny days, few rainy days, lots of cloud cover. So I do believe that there will be some interesting figures that are coming up in the coming months. And then also, while I'm mentioning that, this data is actually published publicly. It's included in the system status reports that's on the NTCSA website. And even though those reports are done on a weekly basis, these figures for the rooftop PVs are updated on a monthly basis. So if you are quite interested in looking at this and seeing how things are changing, this is made publicly available and you can actually download it and look at how it changes from month to month. As to be expected, just quickly looking at the slide, Gauteng, then the larger portion, I would say that that is to be expected. It's an economical hub, and there's a lot of potential investment and also a lot of industry and etc. that's located in Gauteng. So it is to be expected. Yeah. So I think this is quite an important slide in the whole presentation. Yeah. Okay. So I just did a result comparison with other entities just to see how does this fit in. Does the analysis make sense? How do others see this? What other work is being done? So first of all, I'll be talking about SAIEE. So they released their figures publicly for calendar year 2023 quarter one. At that time, their numbers included the PV that's contracted to the NTCSA, in other words, the renewable IPPs. At that time, the renewable IPPs was sitting for PV at 2,287. So looking at the total in that table below showing 5,659, if we remove the renewable IPPs, it means that it indicates a value of 3,297 for the first quarter in 2023. Now, at that time, my analysis indicated that the installed capacity is 3,243. So you can see that those two numbers are very close to each other. So even though SAIEE is using quite a significantly different approach as to mine, our results are still indicating similar values for the rooftop PV. And I think that that is quite a significant thing to mention because it means that the analysis is on par with the figures that SAIEE is indicating. The reason why we look at this specifically in an analytical approach for my area is because we are so operationally focused. We need to know exactly what's happening now. What are we dealing with now so that we can cater for the challenges that we're seeing on the system on the current day and the next few days. So the analysis gives the perspective to be able to do that in a closer to real-time situation. What's great, however, of the results that's released by SAIEE is it gives a breakdown of the sectors. And I think that is very great to look at. So at that time, for quarter one of 2023, residential was looking at, for the rooftops, around about 18%, for commercial sector, 37%, and then the industrial sector, 44%. So it's fantastic to be able to have that breakdown as well. It gives quite a significant insight, and I've included the source there at the bottom. Also, facilities that, so to the right hand of the slide, that have got a capacity of greater than 100 kilowatts or larger. Also, if they have the intent of wheeling through our network, they are required to register their projects with NERSA. So obviously, it doesn't include your smaller installations, for example, at residential level. That's something important to note. And then also, when projects are registered with NERSA, it means they're only registered. They still actually need to be built before they're at a stage where they can operate and start supplying energy. Whether it's for themselves, whether it's through a wheeling, doesn't matter. It still takes quite a time for those projects to be built. So even though, and I've included a breakdown below in terms of year, what is the installed capacity that's registered at NERSA for the rooftop PVs. And the latest total that I got yesterday, but I see they updated the 6th of September, was sitting at 5,564 megawatts. But even in looking at that, there's a delay for when those plants will actually operate on the system. And it's my view that it can be anything up to 12 months, even longer. But if I had to give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's only the projects that were registered in 2024, it means that there's still 1,300 megawatts that are registered but not operational yet. So if you had to use the total of 5,500 and subtract 1,300, you're looking to a value of close to about 4,200 at the moment. Now you'll notice that, as I mentioned on the previous slides, mine is showing almost 6,000. But it's to be expected that it's different, since the ones registered at NERSA only includes your larger facilities. But I do believe that it still gives you a great insight, and it also opens the window to see how many plants are coming. So I was in two minds to decide whether I need to also include this, but I think it's quite nice to show some further work that's being done in terms of the rooftop PV. So for us, knowing the installed capacity of the rooftop PV is significant, and it adds great benefit. And I do believe that it adds benefit across all industries and across all sectors. But specifically for us in the operational environment, it's actually very important for us to be able to know what the output is going to be in the near future. We need to be able to cater for the amount of generation that we need to supply. And if there's any significant deviation on the rooftop PVs, especially on cloudy days, we need to know how much of generation we need to supply additionally to cater for that loss of output from your rooftop PVs. So in order to do this, I first went and I looked at what is the relationship between your weather conditions and your PV production. Now, when we're looking at PV, this is specifically talking about your solar radiation and your temperature. So I used the current contracted renewable IPP PV plants in order to determine what is this relationship, because we've got accurate metering and yeah, like I mentioned before, we've got full visibility on these plants. This relationship is referred to as your facility power curve, or FPC, and it's effectively a matrix that's looking at what is your relationship between different output levels at different weather conditions. I use a binning method, and I again use the approach of a rolling 3-month period. So yeah, so like I mentioned, for the rooftop PV, this relationship is then determined using the output from the contracted renewable plants, but as a percentage of the installed capacity. Because the installed capacity is different and in different areas, the percentage of the installed gives then the ability to apply this to the installed capacity of the rooftop PVs. So by using this relationship, the respective forecasted weather conditions, as well as the estimated installed capacity of the rooftop PV, I can then do a prediction of what their output will be. I do understand that the contracted renewable IPPs, they have been installed to have an optimal and maximum production from their plants. There's optimal spacing between the panels. The angles are, set 100% correct. Some of them also have tracking, whether it's single or dual axis tracking. A lot of them also have tracking to maximize the amount of energy that they can extract from the sun throughout the day and throughout the year. But considering this, it is also clear that you can just look at what you see when you drive past a lot of the residential houses, and sometimes even at your commercial sectors, that the angle, a lot of these installations are not optimal. And sometimes even the direction of the panels is completely wrong. Some of them facing south, some of them facing west, some of them facing east, which is suboptimal. But considering that, it actually gives the benefit that because not all of them are angled perfectly, that there are some of the installations that also extract energy from the sun at different periods of the day, which means that even though there's no tracking for your rooftop PVs most of the time, they do maximize the energy to a large extent, because not all of them have been installed in an optimal direction or even angle. So to a large extent, that this effect is catered for, which adds credibility to the rooftop PV forecasting that I'm doing. So just looking at these facility power curves, I just wanted to put this in perspective. With a lot of interaction, especially overseas, a lot of them is looking at your facility power curves, but as a single matrix. But what I noticed when looking at the data and doing the modeling, the facility power curve is actually different for different times of the day, which makes sense. So if we look at the left-hand graph, this is looking at your facility power curve for those three different temperatures, 25, 30, and 35 degrees Celsius. And then what is your ratio for your installed capacity? So as can be expected, as your solar radiation increases, your output of your plant increases. And this is looking at 12 or noon during this analysis. So for 25 degrees, you will notice that your output is a little bit less than 30 degrees, and then the output is more at 35 degrees. But this is basically showing what your FPC is doing. So for different radiation levels, different temperature, what is your different outputs from your PV plant. So you can see how it spreads out, and then at a certain state, it starts to flatten out. Now, if we use the exact same temperature, looking at the right-hand graph, 25, 30, and 35 degrees again, but looking at 7 o'clock in the morning, you will notice that, again, as your solar radiation increases, 25 degrees is the lowest, 30 degrees is in the middle, and 35 is higher. Obviously, there are a number of different temperature ranges, lower than 25 and higher than 35. I'm just using this as for illustrative purposes. But you will notice between the two graphs, the right and the left, at 7 o'clock, even at the same temperature, your output of your plant is lower. Now, this is largely because of the angle of your solar radiation. And yeah, so it's to be expected. And again, this is not necessarily related to temperature because I use similar temperature even though it's different times of the day. But your angle is different at different times. So that's why I designed my process to have a facility power curve that's different for each hour of the day. So each hour has got its own facility power curve to be able to predict what is the relationship between your output and your weather conditions for that specific hour of the day. So what does this mean? So I use this as a nice example. I know the slide is quite busy, but I do believe that it creates a significant perspective of what's happening. Again, using Gauteng as an example, and this was on the 16th of March. So earlier this year, Gauteng, what was happening. So if we look at the top graph has got a number of variables that's indicated on the graph. I want you to focus on the black line is showing the hourly temperature for Gauteng. So starting on the 13th of March, running up till the 27th of March. The shaded areas is showing what is the cloud cover. So you can see where there are sunny days versus where there are cloudy days. And you might notice that there are small blips of blue every here and there. That's an indication of rainfall. So we can expect, especially on a day where it's very sunny, very hot, that our rooftop PV output is on a high level. So if we look at here on the 16th of March, very hot, very nice weather, you'll see that for Gauteng in that period, the rooftop PVs were forecasted to generate at 1,200 megawatts just for Gauteng. So you can see that as there's cloud cover that's coming in later on, it adds quite a bit of variability to what your rooftop PVs are doing. But your temperatures remain on quite a high level, so your output is still on a nice high level. As we move towards the latter part of this window that we're looking at here the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of March, you will start seeing that we have a large period of cloud cover covering over 3 days, rainfall, and then also the temperatures that's starting to drop. Now, corresponding to that, the forecast is picking up what's happening with this weather conditions, and it's actually forecasting lower levels because of the cloud cover and also the cooler temperatures. So if we compare periods of nice and hot weather and sunny weather, 14th, 15th, 16th of March, you'll see that it's close to 1,200, whereas when we hit here from the 23rd, 24th, 25th, we're sitting at close to 800 megawatts of output. Now, again, even when there are periods of cloud cover, there is still radiation, which means there are still potential for output from your plants, but it creates a significant deviation between what's happening. So in this case, for Gauteng only, there was a 400 megawatts difference between output from the rooftop PVs. Now, 400 is very close to a large unit on our system, and it means that we needed to cater for that extra energy and supply that extra energy into the grid because of the reduction of the output from the rooftop PVs. So it's very significant, and it's very important for us to be able to predict what's happening here, and it creates a huge benefit on our system. So this is just for Gauteng. I also just wanted to illustrate what's happening across the country for that same period. Obviously, not the weather conditions for each province is not the same at the exact same time, but it still gives you a good view of what's happening. So this is just aggregating all of the provinces together, and then the green line at the top is the total forecast for the rooftop PVs. So starting here at the initial period, the rooftop PVs were generating around about 4,000 megawatts. And during this period of colder and cloudy weather, you'll see that it drops to about 3,000 megawatts. That means that there was 1,000 megawatts difference on the rooftop PV generation, and we had to supply that additional 1,000 megawatts through the network. And it's very important for us to be able to cater for that, and it allows us the opportunity to actually plan accordingly and know that we need to make additional generation available during that period so that we are capable of actually supplying that energy. So yeah, it's very important, and I think it's quite a significant stepping stone to be able to predict what the rooftop PVs are doing. Thank you. I think I've eaten close to the 45 minutes.
Henri, thank you very much. It's seldom that we get, I see you getting a clapping of hands. So well
thank you very much. Unfortunately, I can't see that, but thank you very much.
That's great. And thumbs up and so on.
Thank you.
It's quite seldom that we get to see a presentation that's quite so relevant to the stuff that we're doing. I see that there is, between yourself and SAPVIA estimates, there's currently about a 1.6% difference just going on the numbers that were quoted from both sides. So it looks like we've got very useful convergence there, although the nature of the numbers is somewhat different. Online with us at the moment, we have David Taljaard from SAPVIA, and I invited him in today with his colleague Sinetemba to just give us perhaps a couple of comments from their side. I would like to, as I said, I'd like to involve both yourself and the SAPVIA folks in a follow-up webinar to kind of look at the differences and possibly the synergy between these two different forecast methods. I have, for those in the audience, I have placed the link to the Eskom system information. The link is there in the comments, the system reports. So let's go ahead then and take some questions from the guys in the audience. I'm going to first address the questions that have been stated in the comments from our people.
Okay.
Boitumela says, if we were to tag along on the Stats SA census to try and get as much visibility on the PV penetration, what typical questions do you think will give this data more value, especially to ask people/customers? I think the issue here is what attributes to be asking of census data collectors to.
I think what's important, especially when it comes to your census data, is a lot of the time, and I actually touched on it slightly in one of my previous slides, is especially when it comes to the rooftop PV, I think it's quite important for us to be able to know what's happening in terms of the actual installations, and a lot of times in terms of the direction and the angle and so on. Like I mentioned, just by driving through the neighborhoods, you can actually see that there's a lot of installations that are not done correctly. So I think it would be quite good if something like that can be included. And also, I know that there's a lot of work being done in terms of seeing what's installed in the country. But it's also looking at size of panels and average wattage associated to sizes and etc. But there's also, all the technology where you've got huge panels, but a lot of output that you get from those panels. And I mean, these days you're getting smaller and smaller panels, but you're getting a significant amount of extra energy that you're receiving from those panels. So I think a lot of those details is something that can be of great benefit. But I also believe that, by looking at some of the registered projects, especially through NERSA, again, like I mentioned, it's really for your larger installations. And I think it would be great to have a lot more detail in terms of your smaller installations. And also in your market, what is the aptitude of people for wanting to install more energy, more rooftop PVs? I know that the installation comes at a significant cost, but I also know that the prices have dropped in recent history quite significantly. So it'd also be nice to have an indication of, what is the appetite of people to actually install more and more rooftop PV. I don't know if that answers the question correctly.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good stab at it. I think the current situation is that the funders are telling us the price crossover is here, rightly or wrongly, and they seem to have almost unlimited investment to pour into it, as long as people can keep up with the with the repayments. So it certainly is a situation that's looking like it's tipping.
Yeah.
But, I'll just move on to a question by Wayne. He says, even on cloudy days, PV still gives an output. Do you assume that the PV generation goes to zero or some other percentage? If the latter, what percentage? And I guess this is about, what the clouds don't stop.
Yeah, no, I agree with that comment. No, I don't assume that it goes to zero. And that is the reason why, especially for the forecast, I use solar radiation as an indicator for the forecast and not cloud cover. And rightly, as mentioned, even on a cloudy day, there's lots of radiation that's still available so that you can extract energy. So I use that as an indicator and not necessarily the cloud cover.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up question, then we'll go to the audience. I see that there is a significantly steeper ramp rate in Gauteng towards the evening peak. Is this causing problems operationally or not? I'm not sure if this question is for you or somebody deeper in the system side.
No, it's fine. I can take a stab at it.
Please.
We actually started looking at the ramp rates of the demand, and exactly for that reason, because I mean it's obviously something that we are starting to get more and more concerned about, especially because if you look at your timing of your PV generation, it's smack bang in the middle of the day, which means that it reduces the amount of energy that we need to supply during that period significantly. But then towards the evening peak, when the rooftop falls away and obviously starts to get dark, then there's quite a steep pickup into our evening peak. However, in the past year, looking at the ramp rates, it's actually still not as steep as the pickup during the morning. So the highest pickup rate is still from our nights, right at the night minimum, going into our morning peak. So morning peak is normally when everybody gets up, gets ready, gets dressed, gets ready for school. And that's when there's quite a big peak in the morning. So that rate from the night minimum to the morning peak is still the steepest. But at this stage, the generators and generation can still easily cover that rate of change. Which means that the PV still needs to grow quite a bit for the rate at evening peak pickup to be at the same level, which means that generation will still be able to cater for that peak. So at this stage, it's not there yet where it's causing any problems, but I'm saying it with a big yet. Rooftop PV is growing. Contracted renewable IPP PVs are coming online. So I do believe that this is something that we really need to keep a very close eye on.
Yes, thank you. That's very good. I think at this stage, let's take a word from Devet and the guys from Sapphire. Devet, do you have any comments to add here at this stage from your point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, and yeah, thanks for giving us the meeting link and inviting us. Really interesting conversations, and it's great to hear Henri speak again. When you guys released this data set around the middle of last year, it really created a lot of excitement in the solar PV industry, and we at Sapia tend to get a lot of questions around this data set. And I remember that we did have a meeting sometime last year, Andrew. So really happy to see how things have progressed and super exciting, specifically on the forecasting side. I think that's really exciting for us. I think just a comment from my side, and it is very much in line with the comment in the chat. We oftentimes get the question, okay, but how does Eskom take the role of battery energy storage into account? How do you cater for that in your calculations? And I think the reason for that is the one big blind spot on our methodology. Is we can see the solar PV panel area, we can see the gross area. We work that down to a net area, and then using a power density factor, we can then get an estimate of the installed capacity. However, then it's very difficult for us to take that information and then move that into a load or a network impact discussion, because we don't see the battery energy storage capacity, and we also don't have full visibility on the way that the battery energy storage system is connected, and the way that it's programmed. The way that the battery energy storage system is used. So I think that's our sort of biggest question, and we'd really like to understand, Hendri, how you take that into account. And I mean, I've got my grandparents' solar PV system. I can log in and check the production there. On sunny days, the PV system is running at full tilt till about midday, until the batteries are fully charged, and then it's load following. Really dependent on what's happening in the house. So how do you take that into account, the load following versus that the production and that inverter loading ratio that you spoke about earlier?
Okay, so I'm glad that thank you first of all for the nice comments. I do appreciate that. And yeah, I'm glad that you're coming in with the hard-hitting questions. I do appreciate that. Look, I agree. So when it comes to your battery energy storage, or storage as a whole, it is the most difficult component to cater for, even when looking at from an analytical approach. So the one way of answering your question is this, and I want to start off by saying it's not a perfect solution, but it does help when it comes to the analytical approach, is that when it comes to your storage, it is actually already inherently included in what we refer to as the residual demand. So residual demand is the component of the demand that we need to supply by dispatchable resources. So anything that we've got available that we can alter the output of the plant as we see fit to manage the system. Now, as soon as any type of generator, irrespective of whether it's, or even if it's not a generator, any type of storage that's available at your household or commercial industrial sector, as soon as you've got storage, there's a certain way that the storage is used in your normal situation. And what then happens is, because it's used in quite a similar way, it's already inherently included in that component that we are not supplying. So even though you've got PV production and then it kind of gets supplemented by your battery energy supply, because it's still being supplied, it means that that is a portion that we do not have to supply. So since that is the case, and it's a general practice, and I think most of the installations come with a storage capability, it's already inherently included in your demand component, or let's alternatively call it the demand component that we do not need to supply. So what means is, because that's already inherently included in your demand, when doing the analysis of what is the difference between different days for your installed capacity, the component that remains really is only your supply component or your PV component. So basically what I'm trying to say is that it's already inherently included, so that your analysis is trying to get just what is the installed component. Like you mentioned, I mean, and it's same with us. Around about noon, it's still, your PV plant is hoing because it's trying to supply the demand, but also charging the battery. And that's also why noon was chosen as an indicator for trying to determine what is the installed capacity. Like I mentioned right at the beginning of the comment, again, it's not perfect. And I do believe that it's one component that's very, very difficult to isolate. So admittedly, I would say that it's not a perfect solution. The intention really is to say, and I often even get the question of, how can you say that the installed capacity is 5,597.1? It's so exact, but it's really because it's analysis based. By giving it as that is purely saying this is exactly what the analysis is indicating. It's not a perfect answer, but I do believe that it's very representative and very indicative.
Yeah, thanks. That is always the question. How repeatable is it, and is it coherent with comparative other reference sources? That's where people look for certainty. Devet, any further comment from your side?
No, I think, Henri, that it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I think maybe in the communication, if it's possible, I know I'm asking a lot here, but if it's possible, perhaps in the communication, if you could find a way to try and quantify whatever uncertainty is brought in with some of the assumptions that you've made. How many people will actually read that and take notice of it is a different conversation, but at least to have it there, and specifically for those individuals who are really interested and who use this information, I think that would be really, really useful. Maybe just the last point from our side. I was pleasantly surprised when our data came out in the first quarter of 23 to see how closely our estimates were aligned. What I am worried about is what do we do if the estimates are not as closely aligned? That's my one question, because we have data coming out hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks that will take the remainder of 2023 into account. So I'm just trying to, and in Afrikaans you say jy maak voorbrand for that situation. So how do we manage that, Hendri? Because I know the questions that we are going to get. People are going to say, oh, but Eskom is saying X and you saying Y. What's going on? And the same might come to your side. So yeah. I think that's maybe an opportunity that we maybe have to collaborate a little bit and see how we can work together.
For sure. So I think to answer that question, it actually adds to your initial comment as well. And thanks for the suggestion. I think that's actually a great suggestion to also include some of those unknowns, just to whoever's looking at this to be aware of what are some of the not pitfalls but shortfalls, and some of the things to just take into consideration. So yeah, thanks. I think that's an excellent suggestion. But it also, your question kind of adds to that, is that even though this approach is analytical and is trying to get the best possible result, by no means it's perfect. The only way to get a perfect answer is to know exactly every single installation in the country. What's the direction, what's the angle, what's the installed capacity, what's the storage. Short of that, any approach that you use to try and estimate the installed capacity is not perfect. And I would be the first to say that this approach is not perfect. I do try and get it as close to reality as possible. And I use a lot of little things here and there, analytical approaches to try and remove anything that doesn't make sense. But I would be the first to say that it's not perfect. And I think that's the message that we need to carry forward, because Whenever you have any approach, there will be things that it doesn't cater for, and there will be things that it does cater for. And I think similar to the approach that you are using. And my comment would really be that, I wish there were more than, my approach and your approach, so that there are many different ways of looking at this, getting different views, different techniques, that we actually can have some sort of combined view of what's happening with the installed capacity. So, I'm very keen on seeing what your results are showing. But I agree with you. I mean, that's something that we need to work together, and something that can be used to refine both approaches, I suspect. And shouldn't necessarily be seen as something that's conflicting, but rather something that's complementary.
Agreed, yeah.
I'm fully open to any type of technique, not just, like you mentioned, yours and mine. I think it's something that we should all work together to get a optimal result, really.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks, Hendri.
I think there are two significant things here. The one is, if you do present an uncertainty or an error with the forecast, it's almost certain you're going to have to give guidance to people about how to deal with that. The second one, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but we're already seeing, De Wet has said he's been roped in to manage his grandparents' PV system and monitor it. I think the monitoring services on these systems are probably going to be a secondary industry in future. I've got a hands up from Sinetemba. Sine, do you want to come in and give a question?
Thanks, colleagues, for this
welcome.
opportunity. Thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Hendri, for the presentation. I think I share similar sentiments with my colleague, De Wet. This is Natemba from SAPIA. We actually do have, I think, some of the data points which may be slightly unique from the information that your team has. And I do believe that it will make it quite fruitful for this initiative going forward to collaborate, number one. I think I remember earlier you mentioned some information about angles and the likes. Some of that information we do cater, but I do believe in the residential space in particular, there are discrepancies as far as data is concerned, because not every system gets installed and not every municipality makes it mandatory, or rather get registered. So I think those are some of the data points that we can try and collaborate upon, and probably as much as we get more and more information in data recordings, we can get to close data sets as much as we possibly can, even if your team does it from a different approach and we're also using a different mechanism, because that would mean there'll be definitely a low level of tolerance, if I may put it like that. Thank you so much. I think for me it was just that comment.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
Thank you. Any follow-up on that?
No, I think I'm in agreement with that comment. Okay. The only thing that I would like to just mention is that I do believe that collaboration is very important. The only reason why we rely, I just want to mention it just for clarity. The only reason why we specifically rely so heavily on the analytical approach is the ability to have information close to real time available. I know that that's not a major issue for a lot of the sectors and for a lot of the requirements, but especially in our environment, it's crucial. So I do believe that, both methods have got a significant benefit in using, and I do also agree that collaboration is necessary. The one benefit that we enjoy from the analytical way is that it gives us that real-time view, which we can then over time refine, so that in real time we've got a good indication of what's happening. So just want to highlight that. So it's not done in let's call it ignorance or without considering other approaches. It's largely done in order to get that operational perspective.
Yeah, look, I think we're very fortunate, and I wonder how often it happens where you've got a national a national survey view that can be confirmed by two different methods, and end up with kind of less than a 2% difference. It's to me that's kind of startling and somewhat of a we've had a lot of bad luck in South Africa, but this is a lot of good luck, I think.
For sure.
Let's open up the floor. Any questions that are not in the comments? While you're thinking about it, if you have a question from the floor, just take a look in the chat box. Devet is dropping links to various things. Have a look there. There might be some useful reading material. Any question from the floor? We have 2 minutes to go before we need to stop this side of the presentation.
I've already
Go ahead,
asked
Wayne.
2 questions. Okay, it would be nice. There might be a bit of privacy issues as well, reluctance, but if specific PV system inverter suppliers, if they could provide aggregated data to Eskom and even the metros, it could be really nice to use that as a very good proxy to estimate all the PV production and even the battery storage usage in a specific area, and then but how to actually do that and whether people would be willing to sign up to that. That is a bit of a challenge. Just more of a comment, really. Don't know if our colleagues have something to say about that.
Yeah, from my perspective, absolutely. I mean, that would be great. And even, you mentioning it from an installed capacity perspective, but even for us looking at your forecasting view, by having visibility of, even if it's not all of your installation, but quite a number of the installations in terms of what's happening real time, it actually means that you're able to get an indication of what's happening out there, and so that you can align the forecast to match what's actually happening in the real world. So absolutely, it will create a massive benefit.
Yeah, certainly the commercial applications of finer and finer resolution onto such data sets are very appreciable. There are guys looking for business opportunities in exactly this area. So I would guess you would all of the producers of this sort of forecast would be getting approaches on that sort of front. Corin, I see your hand is up. Go ahead, please.
Hi, hello. And Hendri, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Especially welcome, as Marcus said, to see practical illustration of the PV impact. I just wanted to comment on a note you made in the beginning, load shedding, pushing rooftop PV installation. I just wanted to add that it's not only load shedding, especially with load shedding being reduced now, but it's also the aging DX infrastructure that has actually taken quite a knock from the load shedding and leading to increasing frequency of extended breakdowns and so on. So that is still pushing PV installations. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
That's an excellent point. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. Final question from my side is, one of the issues that we have heard from the municipal distribution side is this comment about whilst load may have a fair amount of diversity, cloud cover does not. Do you have any any comfort to give the distribution engineers on that front?
Yeah, I think that is one of the big reasons why a forecast is so important. It's like I mentioned in one of the previous slides, knowing the installed capacity is fantastic, but you need to work from that. You need to create benefit from that. And I think that's where the forecast really comes in, because that gives you the indication of, we know that, like you said, load is much more stable and quite often predictable to a certain degree. But cloud cover can have a significant deviation on what's happening with the rooftop PVs. So by having a forecast available, and I think this is something that will require some future work, but at a more granular level, it actually then creates that benefit of being able to see what's going to happen in the next few days so that you can plan accordingly. So normally your load works conversely to what your output is from your rooftop PVs. So if the rooftop PVs are high, your load is lower during those periods. And when the rooftop PVs are low, your demand that's getting extracted from the grid is higher. So these forecasts, I think, will become crucial in managing all sorts of networks, whether it be at large-scale transmission, distribution, or even local at municipal level. So I do believe that forecasting plays an important role in that component.
Yeah, I think those forecasting feeds to municipalities will become more and more critical as this moves forward.
Yeah.
If we have 30%, if we have 30% penetration of PV, into dwellings, that could be a big major component of that. It'll become important to track. Thank you so much for sitting in, and Hendri, thank you so much for the really exciting presentation, and so nice to see good attention to detail in analytics. That's something which is a luxury. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. I quite enjoyed it.